Now before you go crazy, yes, I'm standing in front of a MOPAR, a 2020 Dodge Challenger Hellcat Redeye. We were super impressed by the gains that we got on this car with minimal modifications. And when I say minimal, I mean minimal. Basic bolt-ons got us a ton of real-world horsepower. By the end of this video, I'm gonna convince you that this Redeye is not a brown eye, and that this package is the best bang for the buck there is. So stay tuned. So at the time, the Dodge Hellcat came out with insane power, 707 horsepower from a 6.2 liter boosted V8. Now, fast forward to the Redeye you see here. This has a larger supercharger, 2.7 liter compared to the 2.4 that the Hellcat had, and it makes more power, a whopping 797 horsepower and 707 foot-pounds of torque. Whoa! Now, before we dug into this vehicle, we actually did a baseline test. Now, I will add that the baseline test in this car included a leg maker intake, which was previously installed by the owner. So if you're wondering, this car baselined at 690 real-world horsepower and 670 foot-pounds of torque. Not bad. Now for the average Joe who buys this car and drives it around, that is plenty. Believe me, this car will put your ass in the seat. But we could not leave well enough alone. The customer was pretty specific about what he wanted. He wanted a little bit more boost, a little bit more sound, and was strictly stuck on 93 octane. Did not want to go E85, did not want to go race gas, didn't want to do a blend. So that presented a little bit of a challenge. We had to be careful not to overboost this engine, not to go too crazy with it. But we knew that we could do it with minimal modifications. But what we didn't know was exactly how much power this thing would make. And man, were we surprised. So guys, how about we feast our eyes on what's actually going on underneath the hood in this beast. I'm sure you're all wondering what kind of modifications we added to this to make as much power as we did, because you're going to be blown away by the gains. And you'd be surprised to know that it was really just some bolt-on modifications. Nothing crazy, no internal work. It's a stock bottom end, 6.2 liter. Just how Dodge intended. So with the exception of the leg maker intake, the engine bay pretty much looks stock, unless you know what you're looking for. So of course, the vehicle was already equipped with that intake. Now a little side note, why do they call it a leg maker intake? So come to find out that the guy who actually makes these intakes also makes prosthetic limbs. So if you look at it, it kind of looks like a prosthetic leg. The more you know. So the secret to unlocking a ton of power out of a 6.2 liter Redeye engine is really getting more air in. And that's ultimately what we did. Now Dodge blessed this engine with a very large supercharger, 2.7 liter IHI supercharger. That's big. You compare that to the 1.7 liter LT4 supercharger, say found on the CTSVs of the Z06s. Right off the get, this is already going to give us the ability to make a lot more horsepower. So let's talk about that for a minute. So let's start at the beginning here. The car already had a leg maker intake. We then turned to the supercharger. We knew that our friends at Joker Porting had a program for the IHI superchargers that gained 50 or 60 real horsepower depending on the setup. So of course we turned to them, we sent them the supercharger, and they did their full race port in and out of the supercharger, opening up the snout, opening up the blower case itself, and even adding a 3.1 inch grip tech pulley. Now of course with any engine, the more air you get in, the more air we've got to get out, as always. So we also added a set of long tube headers from American Racing, as well as their full 3-inch catback exhaust system, which by the way sounds amazing. So one really nice feature about the Redeye and the other Hellcats that we've worked on is just the drivability. You can get all that horsepower and do the modifications, but the thing drives completely like stock. It's really nice when it comes to, especially like daily driving these cars and things like that. Stock trans, stock rear end, stock axles. Really nothing done to it otherwise, just a whole lot more power. Still on pump gas, as we said. So all in all, I'm very impressed. Yeah. Oh yeah. Huh. And that's partial throttle. There's no sense in hammering this thing. All it does is blow the tires off. So what does this all mean? Well, what it means is we picked up a ton of power with minimal modifications, all bolt-on, nothing internal, no cam, no changes to cylinder heads, nothing like that, like we would typically do on some of the other builds that we have. And that's what's so impressive about this. Now, of course, with more air comes the need for more fuel. The only fuel upgrades we did to this engine were a set of Injector Dynamics 1050cc injectors. So, the moment you've all been waiting for. How much did this Redeye actually put to the ground? I'm gonna tell you. This bad boy made 834 rear wheel horsepower, 785 foot-pounds of torque on 20 PSI on pump 93 gas. That is insane. Now what makes this so impressive is the amount of money spent for the gains achieved. If you compare a build like this to say one of our heads cam E85 C7 Z06s for instance, the money you'd have to spend to get 850 rear wheel horsepower of a setup like that in a Corvette is going to be a lot more than this gentleman spent on this car. And that's what makes it so crazy. Now I'm not comparing, they're different. Corvette's a Corvette, a Hellcat's a Hellcat, and let's all be honest, this car's got a lot of weight to it. It's certainly not going to be as nimble or as maybe as quick off the line as a Corvette, but man, for the money spent, it is really, really hard to beat this. So if you guys have a late model MOPAR you've built, we'd love to hear from you. Comment below, smash that like button. If you want more MOPAR content from Florida High Performance, we'd love to hear from you. And make sure you subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you next time. Now before we get down to the brass tacks, now before we go into the nuts and bolts, man, I actually made about 690 wheels, man.